Once upon a time, Edinburgh was famous for three things: brewing, publishing and printing. In 1846, two cousins, Robert and Richard Clark, set up the printing firm R&R Clark. The business did well and grew to be one of the best in Scotland. Clark's quality became the measure of excellent letterpress book printing. George Bernard Shaw, no less, insisted that his books be produced by Clark's. Behind its grand office in Brandon Street was the factory, where Clark's employed large numbers of craftsmen and women. They worked long hours, but they enjoyed a thriving social life and shared works outings, dinners, sports and dances. Records of these occasions survive. From the 1950s to the 70s, Dave Cairns and Jim Kevin rescued and collected photographs, tickets and programmes dating from as far back as 1887, the year of Victoria's Golden Jubilee. This film is the story of printers at work and play. In Clark's three case rooms, the compositors still practiced the old skills of hand typesetting. The first printer, Johannes Gutenberg, from 5 centuries earlier, would have felt quite at home and would have easily recognised the crafts being put to use there. Of course, the majority of typesetting was produced mechanically in the monotype, keyboard and casting departments. They could turn out pages far faster than was possible by hand setting. Once the pages had been read, corrected and imposed, they were ready to be sent to the machine room for printing. The final printed sheet would be taken to the bindery for folding, stitching and trimming, and the finished product was ready for delivery. Tea breaks and the midday meal were taken at the compositor's bench, and type cases were pulled out for use as seats. But when the bell rang at 12:30, it was time to wash up for a well-earned rest. The hour could be whiled away playing cards, chess or shove halfpenny. For the more active, there was table tennis and games of football or volleyball out of doors. Properly organised games of football were often arranged for after work or at weekends. Matches were played between the case room and the machine room, or against rival printers' teams. Abilities ranged from highly skilled to enthusiastic. Summer was the time for the occasional game of cricket, and the social club supplied the necessary kit. Clark's summer outing was the highlight of the year, especially in the days before the family car. Transport could be by charabanc, coach, boat, and sometimes even whole trains were hired to carry the workers to more distant destinations. The compositors even had fun designing the tickets and programmes for the trips. This is the programme for the 1887 trip by boat to Dunakeer in Kirkcaldy, disguised as an emigration prospectus. And the 1888 programme for Ye Picnic or Ye Trip to Hopetoun House, which imitated a theatre programme. Clark's visit to Haddington in 1903 was advertised in the form of a newspaper, the Clarkonian Caper. And even spoof insurance policies were concocted. Some pictures of these early outings survive, showing the Clark's men lazing in the sun in the 1900s, while others show them taking part in an egg and spoon race. You had to make your own entertainment in these days. But the big annual challenge was definitely the Brandon Sprint. Programmes and tickets sometimes picked up on the latest news and fashions, such as the 1906 Olympics, which became the All-Limpin Games. The 1910 Peebles trip was advertised as the Brandon Biplane, celebrating the exciting new sport of flying. Just 5 weeks after their outing to Crieff, war with Germany was declared, and many of Clark's men went off to fight in the war to end wars. It would be 4 years before those who survived were reunited. The printing trade, like most industries, had hard times during the post-war depression, but by 1930, Clark's trips were back in business. A visit to the Empire exhibition in Glasgow in 1938 was the last trip before war returned. Peace finally came in 1945, and Clark's outings were a welcome escape from post-war austerity and rationing. By the 50s, the outings included the workers' families, and fun and games were the order of the day at this trip to Arbroath in 1952. Springtime was the favourite season for the Case Room Chapel outing. At St Andrew's Square, the bus loaded up with compositors, readers, keyboard and caster operators, crates of pale ale, screw tops, double century ales, Fowler's wee heavies, and a matching thirst. highlight of the trip was the football match between journeymen and apprentices. There were no fancy strips or football boots. It was just trousers tucked into socks and no prisoners taken. Clark's had thriving golf and bowling clubs, and at the season's end, prizes were presented at the Bullers and Golfers' Dinner. By tradition, the prize winners filled their cups with whisky and passed them round the company. This helped to lubricate the mandatory sing-song at the end of the night. A good time was usually had by all, but for some of the younger, less cautious lads, oh dear, the following day wasn't so jolly. The Burns Supper in January was always the first big celebration of the year. All through the 50s and the early 60s, the men would gather at the Liberton Inn, and after a pie and a pint, they had their pictures taken with the barman, and then set off on foot for the Harrow Inn at Dalkeith. "1959 was a particularly special occasion, the bicentenary of the birth of Robert Burns, and a banner was specially made for the march to Dalkeith. The route to the Harrow Inn was almost 5 miles long, and the men relieved the boredom by playing football, unbelievably, among the traffic along the old Dalkeith Road. This tradition lasted well into the 60s, but complaints in the Edinburgh newspapers led to a change of route and to the final whistle for their football exploits. When they reached the Harrow Inn at last, they were served with the usual welcome meal: steaming hot haggis, neeps and tatties, oatcakes and cheese, and all washed down with beer and whisky. The Burns Supper was taken very seriously, and long hours of preparation went into the performances. Traditional toasts, poetry, songs and speeches were delivered in Gore, but the evening ended with a more relaxed sing-song, which was continued on the bus journey back to Edinburgh. Throughout the rest of the year, Clark's men could always come up with reasons for having a good time. Machine room dinners, smokers, leaving parties and presentations were ideal opportunities for the regular artistes and performers to do their thing. The Perth Street paper store echoed once again to the sound of rehearsing skiffle groups, kazoo bands, singers and recitation. Every Christmas, the Brandon Social Club laid on a party for the workers' children. Music was provided by Freddie Bewes at the piano, while the Bindery and Machine Room girls organised the food and games like the Grand Old Duke of York, the Farmer's in his Den, and In and Out the Dusty Bluebells. Throughout the 1950s, Santa was played by old Jimmy Gibson, and he made a great job of it. The work's annual dance was often held on the same day and at the same venue as the kids' party, and Santa made a special appearance for the mums. Many of the old-timers who had fought in the Great War ended their working days in the early 60s. They were a fine bunch of men who had experienced hardship with fortitude and good humour. They would be among the last generation of compositors to retire, unlike the younger men who were made redundant when the trade changed forever in the 70s and 80s. You'll wonder why I'm standing here to poetry aspiring. The answer's very simple, friends. Old Cuddle Doon's retiring. He wished that he could slip awa and no draw our attention. The only thing he wished to draw was just his old age pension. He's workit noo for mony years as comp and then as foreman. I doot if ever we shall see his like come through the doorman. He aye was sure our respect and our appreciation, because he always gave to us human evaluation. The changes that our Jock has seen are beyond comprehension. The hours, conditions, was knocked down are just a few I'll mention. When in his time he first did start, hand setting was the rage, and piece rates made sure you had to toil to get a living wage. Whenever there was strike or strife, our Jock was in the van. You've been called Reb and Commie too, but I'd call you a man. You've been a fechter all your days, and never cried surrender. Now you mun gone and tak your ease, while sitting by the fender. Clark's finally closed its doors in 1979, after 133 years of producing beautifully printed books, many of which were of historical, scientific and literary importance. Letterpress printing was arguably one of the most important inventions in history, and in its 500-year reign it made books affordable for the ordinary person and brought about the spread of mass literacy. As for the men and women of Clark's, they learned not only a craft and a trade, but also the best values of society: cooperation, humanity, and friendship.